When I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, I was sleeping in my little my little hovel, and I slept on the floor, and I was having a dream that a little puppy was licking my hand. It was just such a sweet sense of connection with this puppy, and I then kind of like stirred, and I woke up, and I looked at my hand, and there was the biggest cockroach that I had ever seen. I think my years of being in West Africa, I wasn't freaked out. I just kind of like placed it to the side and tried to go back to bed. Tonight's talk is about looking closer at what is actually happening. For me, it was around waking out of a dream state to realize reality. And that's very much a part of what this practice is all about, is kind of waking up out of your dream state to come in contact with what's actually true. I'd like to talk a little bit about how this practice of meditation is really about cultivating insights into the nature of reality. That's the essence of it. And when you do that investigation, what you're exploring is what it's like to bring investigation or curiosity to the whole realm of energy and feeling in the body, inside, but also how it can be around investigating thoughts and beliefs. I also like to talk about some practical, kind of pragmatic skills you can use to refine your capacity for investigation. This is all part of a series on these 7 factors of awakening. Last week we talked about mindfulness, your capacity for observing life without the filter of greed, hatred, or delusion. And this is now about really looking closer, being curious and awake to what is here. A good number of years ago, some friends went through a very, very, very difficult time in their relationship. She was a teacher, traveling a lot, and he was primarily home. And it turned out, kind of revealed that she had had an affair. And as you can imagine, the hurt, the betrayal, the guilt was crushing. And yet, somehow, decades later, they're still together. How did they move from that kind of hurt to healing? Over the course of the talk, I'd like to kind of refer back to their story, because I think it's really illustrative of how honest and authentic investigation can help you heal something that maybe other people aren't able to heal. You know, we all have these searing wounds. We all have these early experiences that shape our perception. You know, as I like to say, somewhat ad nauseum, that some of us are outrage waiting to happen. You know, we're just waiting for anger to explode. Some of us are a sense of not good enough waiting to happen, or rejection waiting to happen, or not belonging waiting to happen, or life is a struggle waiting to happen. Meditation, non-judging awareness, can be a way of waking up to those patterns and reflecting on whether they're really, really true or not. And it's always this question of, what is meditation all about? Like, why are you practicing? Is it to smooth out those stress lines around your eyes, or to concentrate better, or to lower your blood pressure? All those might happen. I don't know about the stress lines, but all those might happen. It's really, I think, about cultivating insights into the nature of reality. It's about seeing where you're caught and seeing how you can get free. Looking closely at where you're not happy and opening to what happiness is all about. So mindfulness is very much in a dance with investigation. Everything you need to know about liberation and happiness and being awake can be found through your powers of investigation. And by this, I mean it's your mind's capacity to observe what is happening in the present moment with wisdom and with compassion. This quality of investigation it's alert, it's relaxed, it's without attachment to the results when it works. So I'd like to talk a little bit. I'm going to come back to those friends who went through that struggle, but to talk a little bit about how we get caught. And referring back to a very profound moment in my life when I was about 5 years old. I grew up on a farm in southeastern Pennsylvania in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. And when I was about 5 or 6, I was standing out on the lawn behind the farmhouse. And I looked down and I saw that there was a snake that was coiled around my feet. Something primal in my little 5-year-old brain, or maybe I was 6, it just kicked off at the sight of that snake, and I freaked. I just freaked out. I jumped about 4 feet in the air. I ran to the porch screaming and just stood there shaking. There's this whole line you may have heard. It was Mark Twain who said, when a cat sits on a hot stove, it'll never sit on a hot stove again, but it won't sit on a cold one either. In that same way, for a long time, I was that cat. I would not stand on that patch of lawn again for anything. I was very cautious when I was outside. And I kind of went through life gathering information about snakes. And a little bit after that, I watched this snake through the window. I watched a snake eat a frog, where it distended its jaw and slowly pulled it in. Whenever we would go into northern Pennsylvania to where my dad grew up on a farm, we were always told, be aware of rattlesnakes. And I remember one day my dad killed a rattlesnake with a shovel. And I developed a pretty consistent thought. A thought was basically, snakes are bad. I had more encounters with snakes over my life. Well, once, again, back in northern Pennsylvania, I think this was in high school, doing some whitewater canoeing. I was carrying the canoe on my shoulders down this rocky embankment, and I kicked over a big rock. A rattlesnake coiled, started rattling. The next thing I remember, I'm up by the pickup truck with the canoe still on my shoulders, going, I have no idea what happened. I think I just jumped about 60 feet. Later, when I was rock climbing in southern Utah in college, I was treated to the experience of, as I'm going up a rock face, hearing and feeling a rattlesnake at my feet. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it against the side of my climbing shoe. Another moment of present moment awareness. Long story, but I waited for a long time, and then I just twitched my toe and it rattled again, and I just was hanging on the rock face waiting for the fangs. I got out of that one. Long story short, waited another really, really long time, and a friend came kind of to the side of the crack and took my hand and kind of swung me away from the cliff face. But if you think the same thought over and over and over again, the thought that snakes are bad and dangerous, it kind of turns into a belief. Snakes are bad, snakes will kill you. And then that turns into a habit. So scanning for evidence pretty much wherever I go on how snakes are going to kill me, and being very suspicious about the possibility of a snake somewhere. And that habit kind of informs your character, being fearful, and then that informs your destiny. Like, I'm never going outside again. And this kind of refers back to this model that I like to talk about, how our experience arises from the moment. First, there's just this raw, unfiltered sensation. It's neither good nor bad. But then that sensation has a feeling tone in your body. I like it, I don't like it, or it's in between. That kicks in a thought. If you think that thought over and over and over again, the thought becomes a belief. That belief becomes your habit. That habit informs your character, and that informs your destiny. I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa and in Niger, where we had the most deadly snake in the world. quite often farmers would step into a nest when they were out in their fields, and the whole nest they would bite multiple times. Really, really pretty bad news. And a little further south, there was a snake that could kill you the fastest in the world. It's called the black mamba, 100% fatality rate. Their venom contains these neurotoxins, and it specializes in eating birds and small mammals. So once it strikes, it needs for the animal to die right away, so it can ingest it. They get really, really big, like up to like 9 or 10 feet long. They hang out either on the ground or in trees, which is really comforting. And the U.S. Army instructions, if you are bit by a black mamba, this is crazy. These are the instructions. Make sure you have your ID tags on and lie down in the open where they can find your body. So this phobia, my particular phobia around snakes. One summer I was biking in Europe, and I stayed with a friend who worked at the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute. And she invited me to come to work with her. And she set me up on a little tour of the facility, and amazing, amazing research that they're doing in kind of these tropical diseases and so forth, working with malaria and all kinds of other infectious diseases. But where I spent most of my time was with this fellow who had a specialty in poisonous snakes and amphibians. And he had a room with every single poisonous snake and a few poisonous toads who were just free to hop around the room. And then he was on call. He had a beeper back then. People would call from all over the world describing the bite and then the symptoms, and he would help them figure it out and also help to get venom to them if he could, or the cure. So we're in this room, and every poisonous snake and toad in the world are kind of behind glass walls. And I was freaked, but I wasn't going to run out of the room screaming. I had that much presence of mind. And then he walked around the room and he tapped on the glass all around the room, and the hooded cobras swayed and the rattlesnake hiss and the mambas, did their thing, rattlesnakes rattling. And there I was with all my phobias, and on the other side of the glass, every poisonous snake and amphibian in the world. And there was something about that moment that was the beginning of a shift for me. I realized I don't want to be run by my fear of snakes. I don't want to miss out on life because of that old impression of a snake coiled around my feet when I was 5. So I actually go outside a lot, and I actually encounter lots of snakes now. I paddle on the Potomac River quite a bit, and there are lots of snakes. In the summer, they're out there sunning themselves on the rocks. One time I came across this Virginia river snake that it must have been 9 or 10 feet long, and I was able to kind of paddle by it and kind of take it all in. I've seen huge copperheads. One thing you really need to be careful of in the summer on the Potomac is if you put your hand on a rock, make sure you check it out first. A couple of years ago, Tara and I were just hiking in the woods around here in Northern Virginia, and a tree snake fell from about 60 feet up and landed right in front of us. And I actually picked up a snake not too long ago. It was a baby copperhead in our living room. So I've taken time to, when it feels safe, to look a little closer at my phobia. And if you had a phobia about snakes and you were to do desensitization therapy, it would go something like this. This is not a perfect clinical example, but for example, you might talk to someone about your fear of snakes. And just talking about it might be helpful. And then your therapist might say, would you like to see a book with pictures of snakes? Well, maybe that would be a little frightening for you, but you'd hang out there and maybe you look at the pictures of snakes and you realize, well, I can actually see pictures of snakes and I'm not going to die. And that becomes kind of okay. And you might talk more about snakes and different encounters with snakes. And maybe at some point your therapist would say, well, you know, there's actually a snake in a cage in the office next door. Maybe that brings up some fear, and you recognize that, and you be with that fear, and you kind of self-calm, and you realize you're okay. And maybe in another session, your therapist might say, well, would you like to just see the snake? Just to see it. And then perhaps if it feels safe, you work with that fear, and you befriend it, and you sense how it's like to self-soothe and how to resource, and then you can actually see the snake and realize that you're not getting activated in that old way. And then maybe you're invited to touch the glass, and maybe at some point just to touch the snake or to hold it. But every step of reclaiming that phobia is a new edge of fear. And what will help you to heal that phobia is two things. First is mindfulness, your capacity to observe without judgment. And the second is your capacity and willingness to investigate that arising sensation of fear, the arising sensation of the trauma response, and your capacity to see it, recognize it, say hello to it, make room for it, bring compassion to it. This really points toward this practice of RAIN that we often talk about, R-A-I-N, to recognize what is presenting, to sense if you can allow it or accept it. The I of RAIN is to investigate, to look closer. The N is to nurture what you find with a sense of empathy, compassion, or kindness. When we can call on this investigative power, things get really interesting. I talk a lot about this line, the line between what you're aware of and what you're not aware of. Above the line is everything that you're conscious of in your life. And below that line in that circle is all the unseen, unfelt forces in your life. For me, working with my snake phobia, there's a lot of fear and anxiety under the line. But by recognizing it, allowing it, investigating it in a way that felt safe, bringing kindness to it, I'm a little more able to be with reptiles. They're not my best friends, but I do have a capacity where I don't feel quite so paralyzed anymore. And actually, I get curious because I see a lot of snakes, and now I'm actually curious as to what they do and how they do it. So how do you investigate? Where do you start with investigation? Well, one area is the sense of the raw data of sensation and feeling tone. We talked about like the raw data of feeling and then the feeling tone. And then what arises from there is the thoughts and beliefs. You can investigate those. You can investigate your habits. You can look at your character structure. You can look at your sense of destiny, where you're heading. All these are kind of ripe for investigation. But what's very, very powerful is that foundational sense of where does it live on the inside? As we like to say, your issues are in your tissues. That fundamental arising of the feeling tone in the body is primary and fundamental. And for many of us who are more intellectual, more head-oriented, we tend to want to skip that part. But quite often, that's the foundation of your experience. So back to this couple. For her, this traveling teacher, searing guilt. She felt almost mute. She was so shut down. We talk in this practice of how when you're wounded, that's the first arrow. But then every time we get caught in self-judgment or aversion, it's like a second and a third and a fourth arrow. And she was racked with so much guilt and so much self-derision that she was really kind of paralyzed. And for him, hurt, anger, disappointment. For him, it wasn't being mute, it was outrage. It was feeling incensed and feeling betrayed. I think all of us, we've all had hurts in life. No one I know hasn't in some way felt betrayed in some way. Classically, when we feel hurt, we close in around the trauma and we move into the trauma response. Fear and helplessness will show up as some form of self-protective anger, ill will, judgment, blame. We unconsciously lash out as a way of self-protection. For others, our way of saving ourselves is disassociation. Just disconnect from the body and go into thinking, go to your happy place. And there we lose a sense of even what we're feeling. The third classic response is freeze. We freeze up and we shut down. And that classic response is, if you've ever seen a little newborn fawn in the woods, they freeze. Because if you freeze, maybe no one will see you and the predator will walk by. So we all have these traumas, if you will. And again, trauma, fear, and helplessness. So if you want to be awake in your life, and you want to be fully alive, you may have some dues to pay. You have to befriend all the areas where you don't feel alive, all those issues in your tissues. And this is where the practice gets powerful. Quite often for many people, when you begin a mindfulness practice, it feels so good, this taste of non-judging awareness and connecting with a sense of ease in the body. Inevitably, what happens for many is this natural organic arising of, oh, well, now that you're accessing non-judging awareness and a sense of presence, what about this? Let's look at this. So investigation, a very powerful form of investigation, is, can you move from the story to how it lives on the inside? And so for him, as he began to sense this, how this issue was in his tissues, was a very, very, very deep, almost a searing feeling in his heart and in his solar plexus. And as he examined it, he described it as something ancient, just a sense of just feeling left behind, a sense that that in his heart of hearts he knew he couldn't trust. So in this practice of rain, recognizing that, sense if you could allow it, investigating the felt sense of how that lives on the inside. And then as he explored bringing a little empathy, a little compassion to it, he felt a little bit of soothing, not a whole lot of healing, but just a sense of like, okay, I see you and I care. That's the beginning of the lubrication that can allow you to let go. And for her, just shut down, close down. She actually couldn't feel below her neck. And just a deep sense of how untrustworthy she was, how bad she was. Now, the interesting thing is, when you are working with undigested experiences, many of them are very, very light. So in this practice of rain, just recognizing it sometimes is liberating. Some thoughts are self-liberating. As soon as you recognize them, they kind of lose their power and they dissipate. Sometimes it requires a little more, okay, let me give this some space. Can I allow it? And just the allowing gives it a little more room. Sometimes it requires a really deep dive into identifying what you're feeling on the inside. Sometimes it requires just a really deep sense of patience. What I found when it comes to healing those kind of core wounds, you can't push the river here. You can't force it. It requires a real sense of gentleness. It's almost like holding a baby. It doesn't have words, or holding an animal. That sense of real care. Like, what do you need right now? It's so foundational to our practice. So foundational. This sense of the willingness just to feel and to hold it in kindness. So many of our wounds are so deep. For me, 5 years old, that's a pretty core, almost not having language. The only way that can be held is in the light of investigation. What is this? And with that sense of mindfulness, holding it without judgment. So as they went on to practice, both practitioners, they just kept coming back to how they were holding it on the inside, not trying to figure it out. That's so key. Just to get more familiar with it. That was the practice. And sometimes there can be a shift over time. Just a sense of, this is what it is. I care about this. Let me just hold this. And over time, there can be a shift. Quite often, that shift is quite profound because it's almost happening beneath conscious thought. It's like when a child comes and the child just really needs a hug, when you can offer that for yourself. It doesn't have to be figured out. But another form of investigation is to explore the whole level of thoughts and beliefs. So in exploring that, it's very helpful to look at what's the core belief you have about the situation. And for her core belief was, I am a bad person. And for him, it was, yes, you are a bad person. You can get locked into that thought for the rest of your life. Because I'm somewhat limited on time, I'm going to just offer a quick summary. This beautiful work by Byron Katie that I find so helpful. Her book, As It Is. No, Loving What Is. I think that's what it is. She talks beautifully around identifying that core belief, which takes some digging. And then to ask yourself, is it true? Do I know this to be absolutely true? And quite often the first response is yes, I'm thinking it's got to be true. But you really ask yourself, do you know that to be true? And then to investigate, what is it like when I think that thought? And primarily what I've found over the years is that's a somatic inquiry. What does it feel like? How does that thought live on the inside? And then to inquire, who am I without this thought? And just listen deeply. There's more to that modality. But for her, to really sense I'm a bad person, and to really sense what it was like inside to feel like she's a bad person, to trace that back, the deep sense of guilt, to sense how the somatic roots of that thought. And then when she had a really deep sense of how old that thought was, how long that had been living, how long she'd been carrying it, to ask that samurai sword question, who are you without that thought? Part of the breakthrough for her was when she said, I was so lonely traveling by myself all those years. I had asked you, she said to her husband, I asked you again and again if you would come and travel with me. I'm so sorry for the pain that I've caused. And for him, when he heard that, just that core cry of how lonely she was, and how she had asked him to join her on the road again and again and again, he said, it's true. You did ask me again and again to travel with you, and I had other things that I wanted to do, and I didn't understand how hard it was for you to be on your own all this time. That was the beginning of a shift that has allowed them to be together for quite a few decades now. So this becomes an integral part of practice. If you want to be alive and awake in your life, there has to be a willingness to develop mindfulness, to develop this capacity to observe without judgment, and a willingness to look closer, to really investigate, what is this? What is this feeling I'm having? How does this want me to be with it? It's easy to get lost in thoughts and just try to rearrange them. But this practice of investigation becomes a very powerful way of moving from blame to taking a deep sense of responsibility for how you are holding and how you're living your life. But this brings up an interesting question, one that I have certainly struggled with, and one that a lot of people will bring up, particularly when you've got a really deep and rich meditation practice established. Or let's say you're on a meditation retreat where you've got a lot of time on your hands. And that is the question, it's like, well, should I be working on stuff in my meditation practice? Should I be scouring for material that I can investigate, that I can recognize and name and really be with? And my response kind of comes from my own experience, is like, should you be looking for stuff to work on? And this is my take. Don't worry, it'll find you. I always come back to this fasting analogy. I used to supervise a lot of fasts for a couple of years. And quite often when you create this container and you take away your traditional food that can be kind of toxic, and you're doing juices or a mono diet or whatever you're doing, there's this natural, organic kind of healing crisis that occurs, where when your body is ready, it starts throwing toxins out of your system, and you start experiencing the bad breath, or your skin breaking out, or digestive issues, or all kinds of stuff. There's an innate intelligence inside that if you pause, and if you create that space, and very much like fasting, where you're taking in really, really good food, when you're drinking in present moment, non-judging awareness as best you can, inevitably, whatever wants to be healed is going to find its way in its own innate, organic way. I've been so many meditation retreats that I've done where I'm meditating and I'm thinking, not this. I thought I was done with this. And if I can take the time to say, okay, welcome. Let's have tea. Let's have a conversation. It becomes an opportunity for healing and opening. So, in the little bit of time I have left, I'd like just to talk a little bit about how you use this practice internally. One time on a meditation retreat, I was feeling disengaged and doubtful. I'd done a number of retreats and more of the same. Oh, guess what? The 50,000 thoughts I'm having today seem to be identical to the 50,000 thoughts I had yesterday. And I was in a little bit of a mind state of why bother? My mind is out of control. I have no self-discipline. Who do I think I am trying to even meditate? So this was a doubt attack. Why bother? And when I recognized, after a whole lot of muddy thinking, that this was actually kind of the weather system of doubt, it became an opportunity to sense, well, can I actually investigate doubt? So can I allow it? Can I make room for it? And so I began to turn my attention to first the somatic. Well, what does this state that I'm in feel like on the inside? Can I name it? And I could feel a tightness. It was a contraction. There's kind of a heaviness. The interesting thing about being on a meditation retreat is there are people cooking for you. There are people cleaning up after you. There's nothing to do. Your job is just to be. So okay, I guess this is going to be an afternoon of just being with doubt. So I wasn't trying to shift it or move it or anything like that. I was just trying to be with it. And I just sat with it, curiosity. So what is the state that I'm in right now? And I kind of had this sense of like a wired and tired child, where the child is just inconsolable, and what they really really need is they need a nap. They need a hug and they need a nap, but it's the last thing that they want. And I kind of saw that inside of I'm tired, I'm wired, I don't know what I need. And just recognizing that tired child, it kind of brought up a little bit of a kind of a spontaneous smile, like a little sense of empathy. And I just thought to myself, buddy, it's been a long day. It's okay. And what's so interesting is by taking the time to investigate that sort of discouraged, doubtful, why bother thing, and just sort of being with the feeling of it without trying to fix it, and having that sort of empathic response arise, my mood completely lightened. Suddenly, it was just easy to stay present. I felt kind of a brightness inside, and suddenly everything felt a little bit sharper. It felt a little bit clearer. And it was so profound for me that this weather system of doubt just felt permanent. I felt like I'm never gonna move through this. But by investigating with mindfulness and bringing in some empathy and compassion, it was like the clouds dispersed and suddenly it was clear skies again. This is one of the most interesting things I find in practice, is that when you feel stuck, when you feel caught, it feels permanent. It feels like this is it forever and ever and ever. But remembering that if you can bring attention to it, if you can call on your practice, mindfulness, non-judging awareness, and the willingness to have tea with whatever arises, what feels permanent can shift quickly. That also includes the really, really positive, wonderful, expansive states as well. They too, of course, are going to change. So investigation can be on this whole level of the felt sense of the body. You can also investigate what it's like in your mind through thoughts and beliefs. And then there's just sort of this whole sense of, well, what is reality? And part of this sense of exploring what is real is recognizing these qualities of reality. First, the law of impermanence. Anything born of causes and conditions is subject to change. Remembering that how you're relating to what is changing has direct implications on how much stress and suffering you'll have. If there's resistance, to the degree you resist, that suffering will persist. To the degree you can let it be, you'll feel more free. This third characteristic of reality is sees into the nature of self, that part of who you are is conditioned, subject to change, but perhaps there's something in you that is unchanging. These three qualities can be enormously helpful when you're investigating at anything and everything, anicca, impermanence. How is this changing? Exploring dukkha, or the nature of stress or suffering. What's my attitude toward this right now? Is there some form of reaching or clinging or holding on? Is there some form of pushing away or aversion or judgment? Is there some form of confusion where I'm really not seeing clearly what this is? Or is there some quality of allowing and letting be? So what I find in this balance of my own meditation practice is that investigation is held in balance with concentration. In my practice, I find it much more helpful to gather attention using concentration. Because otherwise, the mind is just this, as Ramana Maharshi described it, this drunken monkey stung by scorpions. It's just lurching from one thing to the next. So learning how to concentrate the mind, learning how to cultivate one-pointed awareness is just so, so critical. But once you've arrived, once you have this sense of like, this is here and now, then this new faculty begins to awaken. Your capacity to investigate. And I think this whole two-part definition of meditation is so foundational, at least for me. Noticing what's happening as it's happening. That's concentration. As I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware of breathing out. Investigation reveals your relationship to what is happening. What's the attitude in my mind right now? Am I resisting or am I allowing? With investigation, you have this power of sorting through the complexity of your life to really identify truly what is happening in the here and now, and to explore how you can be with it. This practice will not only perhaps help you release those stress lines around your eyes, but it can also open the possibility of greater happiness and greater freedom in your life, no matter what is arising. Let's close with just a few minutes in this short, yet brief, yet truncated meditation. If you like, you can close your eyes. And if you would, take 3 slow and full deep breaths. Just notice the effect of concentrating your attention on your breathing, how it gathers awareness in the here and now. Can you sense this quality of mindfulness, your capacity to observe what is arising without judgment? And can you sense this quality of investigation, the investigative mind? Observing what is happening with wisdom. Alert, relaxed, and awake. In these final moments, you might just take a few moments just to reflect on all that is going on in this world outside you. And you might take a moment to wish yourself well. Imagine yourself filled with a sense of ease. Imagine and feel your capacity for inner peace. Imagine and feel yourself feeling safe from inner and outer harm. And imagine and feel yourself free from stress, free from suffering. And as you deepen the breath, just sense your willingness to be filled with a sense of ease, peace, and freedom. And imagine you could broadcast that feeling out to all beings in all directions without discrimination. May all beings feel peace, safety, and free. And in these final moments, imagine your life informed by this sense of ease and peace, that you might respond to the challenges of your life with great wisdom and boundless compassion. As you're ready now, you might slowly deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I truly hope that this is helpful in your life and that you might respond to the inner and outer challenges of life with an open heart and with an open mind. Thank you again for your time and attention.